The massive space station stretched across the darkness like a city made of glass and metal. Its towers reached out in all directions, each one bigger than Earth's tallest buildings. Ships from 100 different worlds docked at its ports every day. This was the heart of the Galactic Council, where the most powerful species in the galaxy made their decisions. Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck, looking out at the endless expanse of stars. He wore a simple gray suit that looked plain next to the colorful robes and strange armor of the aliens around him. His brown hair was neat and his face was calm, but his dark eyes moved constantly, watching everything. "Ambassador Morrison, it's time for the session," said Amy Carter, walking up behind him. She was his assistant, a woman in her 30s who tried to dress like a civilian, but still moved like the military officer she used to be. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun and her blue eyes showed worry. Jake nodded and straightened his tie. It was a simple black tie, nothing special, but he touched it like it was important. "How many are attending today?" 47 species, Amy replied, reading from her tablet. "The Zephyrians brought extra delegates. The Krita have their military advisors with them too." "Interesting," Jake said quietly. He picked up his own tablet, which looked old and basic compared to the advanced devices the aliens used. "Let's go see what they have to say today." They walked through the corridors of the station. The walls were covered with symbols from different worlds, and the air recycling system worked hard to keep the atmosphere breathable for dozens of different species. Jake moved slowly, like he had all the time in the world. Other delegates passed them, talking in languages that sounded like music, growling, or electronic beeping. A group of Altarian scientists nodded politely as they passed. The Altarians looked almost human, except for their pale blue skin and large eyes. They were supposed to be humanity's friends on the council, but Jake knew better than to trust anyone completely. "The humans are still here," one of them whispered, in their musical language. They didn't know that Jake understood every word. He had spent 3 years learning the languages of every species on the council. "Poor creatures," another Altarian replied. "They try so hard, but they just don't understand how things work here." Jake kept walking, his face showing nothing. Amy caught the exchange too. She spoke several alien languages herself, and her jaw tightened with anger. Jake touched her arm gently, a signal to stay calm. The council chambers were enormous. The ceiling disappeared into shadows high above, and the walls curved away in a perfect circle. Thousands of seats surrounded a central speaking area, with each section designed for different types of beings. Some seats were filled with water for aquatic species, others had different gravity fields, and some were open to space for energy beings. Jake took his assigned seat in the human section. It was small, pushed back near the wall where it was hard to see or hear. Only 5 chairs sat there, even though humanity had billions of people. Most of the chairs were empty. Today, only Jake and Amy represented all of Earth. "The session will now begin," announced a mechanical voice that translated into every language at once. "Today we will hear proposal HC4471 from the human delegation." Jake stood up and walked to the central speaking area. His footsteps echoed in the huge chamber. Thousands of eyes, sensors, and other organs watched him. Some were curious, others were bored, and many showed barely hidden disgust. "Honored delegates," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's sound system. "I bring greetings from Earth and all human colonies. Today I want to talk about expanding trade routes through the Vega sector." A sound like laughter came from the Zephyrian section. Veltar, their chief delegate, was a creature that looked like a giant snake with arms. His scales were bright green and his eyes glowed yellow. "The humans want to expand again," he said in a voice like rustling leaves. "How amusing." Jake continued as if he hadn't heard the interruption. The proposed routes would benefit 17 different species. Trade volume could increase by 30%, and travel time would be cut in half. What do humans know about space travel? Clicked Kreeth, Hive Speaker Zixal. The insect-like being's mandibles moved rapidly as she spoke. Your ships are slow and primitive. Your technology is centuries behind ours. More laughter and agreement sounds came from around the chamber. Jake pulled out his tablet and began reading numbers and statistics. His voice stayed calm and professional, but Amy noticed that he was touching his cufflinks. He did that when he was nervous, she thought. The economic benefits are clear, Jake said. Reduced shipping costs, faster delivery times, and new opportunities. For cultural exchange. Cultural exchange? Veltar's laugh was like wind through dead leaves. What culture do humans have worth sharing? You've barely left your own solar system. Jake's fingers found his cufflinks again. They were simple silver pieces, nothing fancy. But Amy noticed they seemed to catch the light in an odd way. We have shared our music, art, and literature with many species, Jake replied. Human creativity has been well received on many worlds. Primitive scribbling and noise, said General Thakmer from the Hegemony Defense Force section. The massive bear-like creature's augmented limbs gleamed under the chamber lights. You waste our time with these proposals. Jake nodded politely. I understand your concerns. Perhaps we could start with a smaller pilot program. Perhaps you could accept that humans are not ready for major trade expansion, said Dr. Zenith, the Altarian ambassador. His tone was kind but firm. Your species is still very young. Give it time. The vote was called. Jake wasn't surprised when it failed. 43 species voted against the proposal, 3 voted in favor, and 1 abstained. The human trade expansion was rejected, just like every other human proposal for the past 3 years. Jake returned to his seat and made notes on his tablet. The device looked ancient compared to the holographic displays and neural interfaces the other delegates used. But Jake preferred simple tools. Amy watched him write with what looked like an actual pen. What are you writing? She whispered. Just observations, Jake replied quietly. His handwriting was neat and precise. It's important to keep good records. The session continued with proposals from other species. The Zephyrians wanted exclusive mining rights to 3-star systems. Approved. The Crete H requested military aid to deal with pirates in their territory. Approved. The Altarians asked for funding to study ancient ruins. Approved. Jake watched it all, taking notes. He seemed to be writing down everything. Who voted for what, how long each delegate spoke, where they sat, what they wore. Amy thought it was pointless. They already had recordings of everything. Why do you write all this down? She asked during a break. Jake looked up from his tablet. His dark eyes were thoughtful. Information is never pointless, Amy. You never know when seemingly unimportant details might become very important. After 6 hours, the session ended. Other delegates gathered in groups, talking and laughing. Nobody approached the human section. Jake and Amy packed up their things in silence. As they walked back through the corridors, Amy finally spoke her mind. This is ridiculous, Jake. They don't take us seriously at all. They treat us like children. I know, Jake replied calmly. Then why do we keep coming back? Why do we keep making proposals they're just going to reject? Jake stopped walking and looked at her. For a moment, his calm mask slipped and she saw something else in his eyes, something that made her feel cold. Because, Amy, patience is just another weapon, and I've had a lot of practice using it. They continued walking to their quarters. Jake's small apartment was simple and clean. The furniture was basic, made from earth materials that looked crude next to alien technology. But in one corner was something that didn't belong. A small garden where earth plants grew under artificial sunlight. Jake knelt down next to his simple daisy and began watering it with a small cup. The flower was white and yellow, nothing special, but he cared for it like it was precious. How do you stay so patient with them? Amy asked, watching him tend his plants. They insult us every day. They treat us like we're nothing. Jake smiled as he watered the daisy. It was a genuine smile, not the diplomatic one he wore in the council chambers. This little flower, he said softly, survived the journey from Earth. It adapted to artificial light, recycled air, and gravity that changes every few hours. It looks fragile, but it's tougher than most people think. He stood up and looked at Amy. The dangerous thing she had seen in his eyes was gone, replaced by something that might have been kindness. Appearances can be very deceiving, Amy, sometimes. The most dangerous thing in the room is the one that looks the most harmless. Amy went to bed that night, feeling unsettled. She had worked with Jake for 6 months, but she realized she didn't really know him at all. His personnel file said he had been a trade negotiator before becoming a diplomat, but something about that didn't feel right. She fell asleep wondering what Jake Morrison was really doing in the Galactic Council chambers, and why he spent so much time taking notes that nobody would ever read. Jake Morrison woke up at exactly 5 in the morning, just like he had every day for the past 3 years. His small apartment was quiet and dark. The artificial day cycle on the station wouldn't start for another 2 hours, but Jake preferred the silence. He made coffee using water that had been recycled thousands of times, and beans that had traveled across half the galaxy to reach this place. The taste reminded him of home, even though Earth was now just a small blue dot among billions of stars. Amy knocked on his door at 7:30, also just like every day. She looked tired and worried, holding her tablet with both hands. "Jake, we have a problem," she said as soon as he opened the door. "There's an emergency session called for today. Something about the human problem." Jake poured her a cup of coffee and sat down at his small table. "The human problem? That's what they're calling it." Amy pulled up a message on her tablet. "General Thakmer from the Hegemony Defense Force sent this to all council members last night. He says humanity has become a threat to galactic stability." "Jake, read the message slowly." His face didn't change, but Amy noticed he was touching his cufflinks again. These were different ones than yesterday, simple black pieces that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. "Interesting timing," Jake said quietly. "Right after our trade proposal was rejected. Jake, this is serious. They're talking about restrictions on human space travel. Some of them want to quarantine our colonies." Jake stood up and walked to his small garden. The daisy was blooming perfectly, its white petals bright under the artificial sunlight. He touched one petal. Gently. "How many species are attending this emergency session?" he asked. Amy checked her tablet. 62 so far. "That's more than I've ever seen. They've called in military representatives from across the galaxy." Military representatives. Jake's voice was thoughtful. "Not diplomats or trade officials. Military. What do you think it means?" Jake turned away from his flowers and looked at Amy. Something in his eyes made her step back. It was like looking into deep water at night, knowing something dangerous lived in the depths. "It means they've stopped pretending this is about trade or politics," Jake said. "Now they're showing their true intentions." 2 hours later, Jake walked into the council chambers wearing his usual gray suit, but today felt different. The chamber was packed with beings he had never seen before. Military officers in battle armor stood next to diplomats in ceremonial robes. The air was thick with tension and barely controlled aggression. Amy followed close behind him, trying not to stare at the weapons some of the military delegates carried. Energy rifles, plasma cannons, and devices she couldn't even identify were openly displayed around the chamber. "Look at them," whispered Commander Veltar to another Zephyrian officer. "The humans still think this is a diplomatic meeting." Jake heard every word, but his face showed nothing. He had learned long ago that people said the most interesting things when they thought. Nobody was listening. General Thakmer stood at the center of the chamber. The massive bear-like creature's augmented limbs gleamed under the lights. His voice boomed across the chamber without any need for amplification. "Fellow defenders of galactic order," he began, "we gather today to address a growing threat. The humans have been expanding beyond their assigned territories. Their ships have been seen in restricted areas. Their colonies are growing larger than permitted." Jake sat in his usual seat, taking notes on his old tablet. Around him, the military representatives nodded and growled agreement. "What evidence do you have of human aggression?" asked Dr. Zenith from the Altarian section. Even the supposedly friendly Altarians looked concerned. "Evidence?" General Thakmer laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "They ask for trade routes through our most strategic systems. They want access to our technology. They spread their culture like a virus across peaceful worlds. We have followed all galactic laws," Jake said, standing up. His voice was calm and reasonable. Every human colony was established in approved sectors. Every trade agreement was properly negotiated. Negotiated? Veltara's scales rippled with amusement. "You call your pathetic begging negotiation?" More laughter came from around the chamber. Jake nodded politely and sat back down. Amy saw him make another note on his tablet. "The human problem requires a solution," continued General Thakmer. "I propose immediate restrictions on human expansion. No new colonies, no new trade routes, no access to advanced technologies." "Seconded," clicked Kreeth Hive Speaker Zixal. "Humans have proven they cannot be trusted with freedom. A hegemony." Admiral that Jake had never seen before stood up. His species looked like walking crystals, and his voice sounded like breaking glass. "I suggest we go further," the crystal being said. "Human cargo ships should be inspected regularly. Their crews should be questioned. Any violation should result in imprisonment." Jake's pen stopped moving on his tablet. Amy glanced at him and saw that his breathing had changed. It was slower now, more controlled. "You want to search our ships without cause?" Jake asked. "Question our people without evidence. We want to prevent a problem before it becomes a war," General Thakmer replied. "Your species is young and aggressive. History shows what happens when primitive races gain too much power too quickly." "We are not primitive," Jake said quietly. "No?" Veltar's laugh was like wind through a graveyard. "Your fastest ships take months to cross distances we travel in days. Your weapons are chemical explosives and metal projectiles. Your computers are barely more advanced than counting machines." Jake made another note. Amy tried to see what he was writing, but his handwriting was too small to read from her angle. "The vote is called," announced the mechanical voice. "All in favor of implementing immediate restrictions on human activities." Hands, claws, tentacles, and other appendages rose around the chamber. Amy counted them with growing horror. 58 species voted in favor. Only 3 voted against, and 1 abstained. "The motion passes," the voice announced. "Human space travel is now restricted to approved routes. Human colonies are limited to current populations. All human cargo vessels are subject to random inspection." Jake stood up and walked to the central speaking area. The chamber fell silent, waiting to hear humanity's response to their defeat. "Honored delegates," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the enormous space. "I request permission to contact Earth Command to inform them of these new restrictions." "Permission denied," General Thakmer said immediately. "All human communications are now monitored. You may send a message through official council channels." "Only," Jake nodded. "I understand. May I ask how long these restrictions will remain in place?" "Until your species proves it can be trusted," Veltar replied. "Which may be never." More laughter echoed through the chamber. Jake stood there calmly, waiting for it to die down. "I see," he said finally. "And if we refuse to accept these restrictions?" The laughter stopped. General Thacmer S. augmented Lin's word as he leaned forward. "Then you will discover why the Galactic Council has maintained peace for 3,000 years, little human. We have weapons that could turn your homeworld into dust. We have fleets that could crush your colonies like insects." Jake was quiet for a long moment. Around the chamber, military officers checked their weapons and smiled with anticipation. "I understand your position," Jake said at last. "I will need time to consider humanity's response." "You have until tomorrow," General Thacmer declared. "Then you will sign a formal agreement accepting these terms, or face the consequences." Jake bowed politely. "Thank you for your consideration. I request permission to address the Council one final time tomorrow before making our decision." "Granted," the General said with amusement. "It should be entertaining to watch you beg." Jake returned to his seat and packed up his tablet. Amy noticed that his movements were different now, more precise, more purposeful. The nervous energy that usually made him fidget with his cufflinks was completely gone. As they left the chamber, alien delegates congratulated each other on finally putting humanity in its place. They talked about dividing up human territories once the restrictions drove Earth's colonies to collapse. "They think they've won," Amy whispered as they walked through the corridors. Jake was quiet until they reached his apartment. Then he sat down at his table and opened his tablet. The screen showed what looked like technical diagrams and lists of numbers. "Jake, what are those?" Amy asked. He looked up at her. The dangerous thing she had glimpsed in his eyes before was back, but stronger. Now much stronger. 3 years of observations, Amy. Guard rotations, security protocols, structural weak points, communication frequencies, psychological profiles of every delegate in that chamber. Amy felt cold. Why would you need all that? Jake smiled, but it wasn't the diplomatic smile he wore in the council chambers. This smile belonged to someone else entirely. "Because they just made their first real mistake," he said softly. "They think diplomacy is weakness. They think patience means we're afraid. They think humanity will just accept whatever they decide to do to us." He closed the tablet and stood up. When he moved now, Amy realized he didn't look like a diplomat anymore. He moved like a soldier, like someone who had spent years learning how to kill efficiently and quietly. "What happens now?" she asked. Jake Morrison stood in front of his small mirror, adjusting his tie with the same careful movements he had used every morning for 3 years. But today was different. Today, Amy noticed that his hands didn't shake at all. The nervous energy that had always made him fidget was completely gone. "Are you ready for this?" Amy asked. She had barely slept, worrying about what would happen when Jake refused to sign the surrender document. Jake turned to face her. His gray suit was perfectly pressed, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, but his eyes were different. They were calm and focused in a way that made Amy's skin crawl. "I've been ready for this day since I first arrived here," Jake said quietly. He picked up his tablet from the table. The device looked the same as always, but Amy noticed he was holding it differently, like it was a weapon instead of a notepad. They walked through the station corridors one last time. Other delegates passed them, many smiling or making jokes about the human surrender they expected to witness. A group of Zephyrian officers laughed loudly as Jake walked by. "Look at him," one of them hissed in their own language. "Still pretending to have dignity." Jake heard every word but said nothing. Amy saw him touch his cufflinks once, and she noticed they were different again. These ones were completely black, like small pieces of the void between stars. The council chambers were packed. Every seat was filled, and many delegates stood along the walls. They had come to see humanity's final defeat, to watch Earth's ambassador beg for mercy before signing away his species' freedom. General Thacmer stood at the center of the chamber. holding a datapad that contained the surrender terms. The massive, bear-like creature's augmented limbs gleamed under the lights as he gestured dramatically. "Today marks a new chapter in galactic history," he announced. "Today, the human problem is finally solved." Cheers and approval sounds echoed through the chamber. Jake walked calmly to his assigned seat and sat down. He placed his tablet on his lap and folded his hands over it. Amy sat beside him, trying not to look at the weapons many of the military delegates were carrying. "Ambassador Morrison," General Thakmer called out. "Please come forward to receive the terms of humanity's surrender." Jake stood up and walked to the central speaking area. His footsteps echoed in the huge chamber, but the sound was different now, stronger, more purposeful. Several delegates noticed the change in his posture. "Honored delegates," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "I stand before you today to deliver humanity's response to your generous offer." His tone was still diplomatic, but something had changed. The uncertainty was gone. The nervousness had vanished. What remained was something that made several of the nearer delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Before I give you our answer," Jake continued, "I want to thank you for teaching me so much during my time here." General Thakmer frowned. "Teaching you? What are you talking about, human?" Jake smiled. It was not the polite diplomatic smile the delegates remembered. This smile belonged to a predator. "You taught me that the Zephian military keeps their main communication hub on Level 47 of this station," Jake said conversationally. "You taught me that Kreeth battle doctrine relies heavily on coordinated swarm attacks that fall apart when their command structure is disrupted." Veltar's scales began to change color, a sign of alarm among his species. "What is the meaning of this?" "You taught me that Hegemony Defense Force officers have their life support systems connected to their augmented limbs," Jake continued, his voice still perfectly calm. "Disable the limbs, and they can't breathe. Very useful information." "General." Thakmer stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over Jake. "Are you threatening us, little human?" Jake's smile grew wider. "Threatening? No, General. I'm educating. Just like you've been educating me for 3 years." He touched his tablet, and the screen lit up with what looked like technical diagrams. But these weren't trade proposals or economic reports. They were detailed schematics of the station's systems. "Did you know," Jake said, still speaking in that calm, conversational tone, "that this station has over 14,000 security cameras? And that every single one of them has been recording everything for the past 3 years?" Amy watched in growing horror as Jake's tablet displayed video feeds from all over the station. Private meetings between delegates, secret deals, weapons shipments, things that were never supposed to be seen by outsiders. "You also taught me about corruption," Jake continued. "Commander Veltar, for instance, has been selling military secrets to the Hegemony for 2 years. General Thakmer has been planning to invade Altarian space as soon as this human crisis is resolved." Chaos began to spread through the chamber as delegates realized their most sensitive secrets were being broadcast for everyone to see. Species that had been allies for centuries began looking at each other with suspicion and fear. "How did you access our secure systems?" demanded Admiral Crickster, the crystal being who had called for human ships to be searched. Jake touched his cufflinks, and Amy finally understood what they really were. Not nervous fidgeting aids, but sophisticated data collection devices that had been recording and analyzing everything for 3 years. "You taught me that alien technology is very advanced," Jake said. "But you also taught me that advanced technology often has more ways to break it." He pressed something on his tablet, and the lights in the chamber began to flicker. Emergency alarms started sounding from somewhere deep in the station. "What's happening?" Dr. Zenith shouted over the noise. Jake's expression didn't change. "You're learning what humans are really like when we stop being diplomatic." The gravity in the chamber began to fluctuate. Some delegates found themselves floating, while others were pressed down into their seats. The environmental controls started cycling through different atmospheric mixtures, making it hard for many species to breathe properly. "Stop this!" General Thakmer roared, reaching for his weapon. Jake looked at him with mild interest. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, General. Your augmented limbs are controlled by the same computer system that I've been studying for 3 years. Would you like me to demonstrate what happens when I turn them off?" The general's hand froze halfway to his weapon. Around the chamber, other military officers found that their equipment was no longer responding to their commands. "This is impossible," Voltar hissed. "Human technology is primitive." "You said so yourself." "I said a lot of things," Jake replied. "Most of them were lies." Amy stared at Jake in shock. The nervous, patient diplomat she had worked with for 6 months was gone. In his place stood someone who radiated controlled danger like heat from a fire. "You see," Jake continued, addressing the entire chamber, "you made one very important mistake. You assumed that what you saw was all there was to see." He touched his tablet again, and holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber. They showed star maps with human ships positioned in systems across the galaxy. But these weren't the small trade vessels the Council knew about. These were warships, hundreds of them. "You taught me that humans are weak and primitive," Jake said. "So we let you believe that. You taught me that our technology is centuries behind yours. So we showed you simple tools while hiding our real capabilities." The delegates stared at the displays in growing horror. The human fleet they were seeing was larger than any single species' military force. And it had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. "You taught me that you don't respect anything except strength," Jake continued. "So I spent 3 years cataloging your weaknesses while you mocked our apparent limitations." General Thakmer tried to activate his emergency communicator, but the device remained silent. "Our distress signals aren't working." "No, they're not," Jake agreed pleasantly. "I've taken control of all communication systems on this station. Nobody is calling for help because nobody can." Jake removed his suit jacket with deliberate care, folding it neatly and setting it aside. Underneath, his white shirt revealed the lean, scarred physique of someone who had spent years training for war. Amy saw old battle wounds that spoke of conflicts she had never imagined. "Who are you?" she whispered. Jake looked at her with something that might have been kindness. "I'm sorry you had to see this, Amy, but they needed to learn that humans have more than one face." He turned back to the terrified delegates. "My name is Jake Morrison. For the past 3 years, I've been your ambassador, your patient diplomat, your harmless human who took notes and tended flowers." He picked up his tablet and held it like the weapon it had always been. "But before I came here, I was Admiral Jake Morrison, commander of Earth's Deep Space Reconnaissance Fleet. I was the person who planned humanity's expansion into this galaxy. I was the one who decided how we would deal with species that threatened us." The chamber fell completely silent, except for the sound of failing systems and labored breathing. "You wanted to see what humans are really capable of when we stop being diplomatic," Jake said softly. "Congratulations, you're about to find out." Amy realized that everything she thought she knew about Jake Morrison had been a lie. The man standing before the council wasn't a failed diplomat who had endured 3 years of humiliation. He was the most dangerous human in the galaxy, and he had been playing a game that no one else even knew had started. The Galactic Council station shuddered as Jake Morrison's hidden programs took control of every system. Emergency lights flashed red throughout the massive structure, and the sound of failing machinery echoed through the corridors. What had been the symbol of alien power was now Jake's weapon. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the center of the council chambers, no longer pretending to be the harmless diplomat. His tablet glowed with readouts that showed him complete control over the station's life support, gravity, communications, and defense systems. "This is impossible," General Thakmer growled. his augmented limbs sparking as they fought against Jake's electronic interference. Human technology cannot do this. Jake looked at the massive bear-like creature with mild amusement. You keep saying that word, impossible. I don't think it means what you think it means. Around the chamber, alien delegates struggled with equipment that no longer obeyed their commands. Weapons powered down without warning. Communication devices went silent. Even the translation systems began to malfunction, forcing many species to rely on languages they barely understood. You want to know how this is possible? Jake asked, his voice carrying clearly through the chaos. Let me explain what really happened during my 3 years here. He touched his tablet, and new holographic displays appeared above the delegates' heads. They showed detailed technical specifications that made several alien engineers gasp in recognition. Every time you rejected our trade proposals, I was mapping your computer networks, Jake continued. Every time you insulted human technology, I was downloading your technical manuals. Every time you laughed at our primitive tools, I was installing backdoors in your most secure systems. Dr. Zenith, the Altarian ambassador, stared at the displays in horror. The quantum encryption protocols, you've broken them all. Broken them? Jake's smile was cold. I didn't break them. I helped design them. The revelation hit the chamber like a physical blow. For decades, the Altarians had been selling their advanced encryption technology to other species, claiming it was impossible for anyone to crack their quantum codes. You see, Jake explained, humans have been in this galaxy much longer than you thought. We've been your technicians, your maintenance workers, your translators. You never saw us as threats, so you never bothered to check if we were who we claimed to be. Veltar's scales had turned a sickly yellow color. The technical staff on my homeworld. The communication specialists we hired. All human agents, Jake confirmed. We've been inside your systems for 20 years, learning everything about how you think, how you fight, how you can be defeated. General Thakmer tried to stand, but his augmented limbs locked up completely. Jake had taken control of the cybernetic systems that kept the general alive, turning the alien's own technology against him. Let me show you what human primitive technology can really do, Jake said. He pressed a series of commands on his tablet, and the main display screen in the chamber lit up with a view of space outside the station. But this wasn't the peaceful scene the delegates expected to see. Human warships were decloaking all around the station. Dozens of them, each one larger and more advanced than anything in the Council's combined fleets. Their hulls were sleek and dark, covered with weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Meet the Earth Defense Fleet, Jake announced. These ships have been waiting here for 3 years, watching everything you do, ready to act if diplomacy failed. Amy stared at the ships in shock. Jake, how many are there? In this system? 47 combat vessels. Jake's tone was casual, like he was discussing the weather. Galaxy-wide? Let's just say we've been busy since we joined the Council. Kreef Hive speaker Zixal's mandibles clicked frantically. Our scouts would have detected such a fleet. Our sensors show nothing. Your sensors show exactly what we want them to show. Jake replied. Human stealth technology is about 50 years ahead of your best detection systems. We've been using it to map every military installation in Council space. The chamber's artificial gravity fluctuated again, and several delegates found themselves floating helplessly in the air. Jake controlled their movement with small gestures on his tablet, like a conductor directing an orchestra. You wanted to restrict human movement, Jake said to the floating delegates. You wanted to inspect our cargo ships and imprison our crews. Let me ask you something. What makes you think you have the power to restrict anything we do? Admiral Crickster, the crystal being who had called for human ships to be searched, tried to speak but found that the atmospheric mixture had changed to something his species couldn't process properly. Having trouble breathing, Admiral? Jake asked politely. That's because I've adjusted the life support to human normal. Don't worry, it won't kill you. It will just make you very uncomfortable. Jake walked slowly around the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Many of the delegates watched him with the terrified attention of prey animals watching a predator. For 3 years you taught me about yourselves, Jake continued. You showed me your military tactics, your political structures, your economic weaknesses. You told me which species hate each other, which alliances are real, and which ones are just for show. He stopped in front of Veltara's section. The Zephyrian commander was struggling to breathe in the modified atmosphere. Commander Veltar, for example, has been embezzling funds from his military budget for 2 years. He's also been planning to overthrow his own government and declare himself emperor. Veltar's scales flashed through several colors as other Zephyrian delegates turned to stare at him in shock. General Thakmer has secret weapons facilities in neutral space, in violation of 17 different treaties, Jake continued, moving to the next section. Admiral Crickster has been conducting illegal experiments on captured pirates from at least 6 different species. Each revelation sent new waves of suspicion and fear through the chamber. Species that had worked together for centuries began to look at each other with mistrust. But my favorite discovery, Jake said, returning to the center of the chamber, was learning about the real reason you wanted to restrict human expansion. He touched his tablet again, and the display showed star charts marked with mineral deposits, strategic locations, and trade routes. You're not afraid of human aggression, Jake announced. You're afraid of human competition. The sectors you wanted to keep us out of contain the richest resources in known space. You've been hoarding them for yourselves while telling everyone else they're worthless. Dr. Zenith tried to speak, but his voice came out as a whisper in the thin atmosphere. How could you know all this? Because humans are very good at listening, Jake replied. And you never bothered to check if we were actually as primitive as we seemed. Jake's tablet chimed softly, and he glanced at the display. Ah, perfect timing. Ladies, gentlemen, and various other forms of life, I'd like you to meet some friends of mine. The chamber's main doors opened, and human soldiers walked in. But these weren't the simple security guards the aliens had seen before. These men and women wore advanced combat armor that made them look like mechanical giants. Their weapons were clearly far beyond anything the Council had seen. Allow me to introduce Captain Lisa Park and her tactical team, Jake said, as the humans took positions around the chamber. They've been living on this station for 6 months, disguised as maintenance workers. Captain Park removed her helmet, revealing a young woman with short black hair and cold, professional eyes. Admiral Morrison, the station is secure. All Council. Military forces have been disarmed and confined to quarters. Excellent work, Captain. Jake turned back to the terrified delegates. Now where were we? Ah yes, we were discussing the terms of humanity's surrender. He smiled, and several delegates whimpered. I'm afraid there's been a change of plans, Jake continued. Humanity will not be surrendering today. In fact, we won't be surrendering ever. General Thakmer managed to force words through his malfunctioning augmentations. You cannot fight the entire galaxy, human. Fight the galaxy? Jake laughed, a sound with no humor in it. General, you still don't understand. We don't want to fight the galaxy. We want to save it. He gestured to the displays showing corruption, illegal weapons, and secret wars between Council species. Look around you. Your great galactic civilization is rotting from the inside. You've become so focused on maintaining power that you've forgotten how to actually govern. Half of you are planning wars against the other half. Jake picked up his suit jacket and put it back on, transforming himself back into the image of a diplomat. But now everyone could see the predator hiding beneath the polite exterior. Humanity didn't come to this galaxy to conquer it, Jake said quietly. We came to fix it. And whether you like it or not, that's exactly what we're going to. Do. Amy watched Jake smooth down his tie with the same careful movements he had used every morning for 6 months. But now she understood that every gesture had been calculated. Every moment of apparent weakness had been performance. The most terrifying thing wasn't that Jake had deceived them all. It was that he had done it while genuinely trying to solve their problems diplomatically first. Now that diplomacy had failed, the galaxy was about to learn what humans did when peaceful solutions were no longer possible. 3 hours after Jake Morrison revealed his true identity, the Galactic Council Station had become the center of the most dramatic shift in power the galaxy had ever seen. Emergency broadcasts were being sent to every world in known space, but the messages weren't distress calls. They were Jake's own words, transmitted on every frequency. Citizens of the galaxy, Jake's voice carried across millions of star systems. For too long, your leaders have lied to you about humanity. Today, you learn the truth. Jake stood in the council chambers, now transformed into a command center. Human technicians worked at stations throughout the room, their advanced equipment making the alien technology look like children's toys. The delegates who had tried to humiliate humanity just hours before now sat in designated areas, under guard but unharmed. Amy watched Jake coordinate the largest military operation in Galactic history with the same calm efficiency he had once used to tend his garden. Ships were moving across space, taking control of strategic positions while avoiding any unnecessary violence. Admiral Morrison, Captain Park reported, all major military installations in Council space have been secured. Total casualties are minimal. Most alien forces surrendered without fighting once they saw our ships. Jake nodded, making notes on his tablet. Even now, he was still taking careful records of everything. Any resistance? The Hegemony Third Fleet tried to engage our forces near the Vega system, Park replied. They retreated after we disabled their command ship. No permanent damage to either side. Good, Jake said. I want this transition to be as peaceful as possible. General Thakmer, his augmented limbs now functioning again but monitored by human systems, struggled to understand what was happening. Transition? What transition? Jake turned to face the massive alien, his expression patient but firm. The transition from a corrupt oligarchy to a functioning democracy, General. Something this galaxy has needed for a very long time. He gestured to displays around the chamber, which now showed detailed analyses of every major council decision from the past century. Corruption, favoritism, and abuse of power were highlighted in colors that made the patterns impossible to ignore. Look at your own records, Jake said. Trade agreements that benefit only the largest species. Military actions that protect corporate interests instead of citizens. Resource allocation that leaves entire worlds in poverty while council members grow rich. Dr. Zenith leaned forward from his designated area. You think humans can do better? I think anyone can do better than this, Jake replied. But humans have something you've forgotten. We remember what it's like to be the underdog. Jake walked over to where Veltar sat with the other Zephyrian delegates. The serpentine creature's scales were a dull gray color that indicated fear and submission. Commander Veltar, your homeworld has a population of 12 billion people. How many of them have ever had a voice in council decisions? Veltar's reply was barely a whisper. The council represents all species equally, does it? Jake pulled up voting records on his tablet. In the past year, decisions affecting Zephyrian worlds were made by a council where Zephyrians hold only 3% of the votes. The same 3% that owns 60% of your planet's wealth. Similar patterns appeared for every species in the chamber. The council wasn't representing their people. It was representing the elite who had seized power and refused to give it up. This is why you were so afraid of human expansion, Jake continued. Not because we were aggressive, but because we showed your people that there was another way to live. Amy finally spoke up. Jake, what happens now? You can't run the entire galaxy with military force. Jake smiled, and for the first time in hours, it looked genuine. You're absolutely right, Amy. Military force can change who's in charge. It can't create lasting peace. He touched his tablet, and new displays appeared showing detailed plans for governmental reform. Constitutional frameworks, voting systems, economic policies, and civil rights protections were outlined in careful detail. We're not here to rule the galaxy, Jake announced. We're here to teach it how to rule itself. The plans were more comprehensive than anything the Council had ever attempted. Every species would have proportional representation based on population, not wealth. Trade agreements would be transparent and subject to public review. Military actions would require approval from elected representatives. This is impossible, Admiral Crickster said, his crystal body flickering with agitation. Too many species, too many different needs. The galaxy is too complex for democratic government. Is it, Jake asked? Or have you just been told it's too complex by people who benefit from the current system? He pulled up data showing successful democratic governments on thousands of worlds throughout human space. Some were simple republics, others were complex federations, but all of them gave their citizens a voice in their own governance. Humans have been experimenting with democracy for centuries, Jake explained. We've made mistakes, we've learned from them, and we've gotten better. Now we want to share what we've learned. Jake's tablet chimed, and he checked the incoming message. His expression brightened slightly. Ladies, gentlemen, and various others, he announced. I have excellent news. The first free elections in galactic history will be held in 6 months. Every world, every species, every citizen will have a chance to choose their own representatives. The reaction from the alien delegates was immediate and loud. Some protested that their people weren't ready for such responsibility. Others argued that the current system had maintained peace for thousands of years. Jake listened patiently to every objection, then addressed them one by one with the same methodical approach he had used for diplomatic negotiations. You say your people aren't educated enough to vote, Jake said to one delegate. Then we'll build schools. You say they don't understand complex issues. Then we'll create systems to explain those issues clearly. For every problem the delegates raised, Jake had a solution. For every excuse they made, he had examples of how other worlds had overcome similar challenges. You're offering to completely rebuild galactic civilization, Dr. Zenith said, his voice filled with wonder and fear. Why? What do humans gain from this? Jake was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars visible through the chamber's observation windows. 3 years ago, I came here as a diplomat because we believed in the idea of the Galactic Council. He said finally, we thought we could work within your system to make things better for everyone. He turned back to face the delegates, and Amy saw something in his eyes that she had never noticed before. It wasn't anger or ambition, it was sadness. But your system wasn't designed to get better, Jake continued. It was designed to stay exactly the same, with the same people in power, making the same decisions, while billions of citizens across the galaxy had no voice in their own lives. Jake walked back to his small garden, which human technicians had carefully preserved during the takeover. The daisy was still blooming, its white petals bright under the artificial lights. You taught me that patience is sometimes the most dangerous weapon, Jake said, touching the flower gently. But you also taught me that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. He looked up at Amy, and she saw the diplomat she had worked with for 6 months. He was still there, beneath the admiral and the strategist and the warrior. He was still the man who cared for a simple flower because it reminded him of home. So we're going to fix this, Jake said simply. Not because we want to rule the galaxy, but because someone needs to give it back to the people who actually live in it. Over the following weeks, Jake's promise began to become reality. Human advisors arrived on thousands of worlds, not as conquerors, but as teachers. They showed people how to organize elections, how to create fair laws, how to hold their leaders accountable. Some species resisted at first, but when they saw their neighbors prospering under the new system, resistance faded. For the first time in galactic history, ordinary citizens had a real voice in their own government. Jake Morrison returned to his role as Earth's ambassador, but now he represented humanity in a council that actually listened. The nervous habits were gone, the patient smile was real, and his garden grew larger every day. Amy often found him there in the evenings, tending to flowers from dozens of different worlds. When she asked him if he missed the excitement of military command, Jake would just smile and water his plants. "The most dangerous thing in the galaxy," he would say, "is an idea whose time has come. And the idea that people should govern themselves is one that no amount of force can stop." The galaxy had learned to respect humanity, not because humans were stronger or smarter, but because they had shown everyone what was possible when power truly belonged to the people.